Welcome to this edition of Macroeconomic Update on the new website, brandltheeconomist.com. So what I'm going to try to do with these video blogs is to have it be a little bit more interesting setting as opposed to me just sitting in my office somewhere. So we're out enjoying the nice Midwestern summer weather today. But while the weather is nice this summer, the economy is a different story. We got problems with inflation, increasing costs of living for the American people, and on top of it, some pretty bad macroeconomic policy and policy suggestions. This week, we heard from the Biden administration their idea of having a gasoline tax holiday. The idea is that the federal government collects a tax of 18.4 cents on every gallon of gasoline. And so the idea is, well, what if the federal government doesn't collect that tax for the next 3 months? That'll then result in lower prices for gasoline and help reduce the cost of living for the American people. I mean, that's the idea. Will it work? Kind of doubtful. I mean, one of the things is, how can you be sure that if the federal government stops collecting the tax, that all of that savings is going to go into the pocket of the American consumer? Maybe what could happen is the retailers will just keep prices exactly the same and just pocket that 18.4 cents a gallon, in which case there wouldn't really be any benefit to the American consumer, but there'll be damage done to the federal government because now the federal government's not collecting that tax revenue, and that tax revenue is supposed to go for roads, bridges, and infrastructure. So you've got an implicit cost without really a whole lot of benefit. But let's suppose that the cost saving does get passed along to the American people, 18.4 cents a gallon. What impact is that going to have? I mean, one thing that it could do is by lowering the cost of gasoline, you could see an increase in quantity demanded, which means that Americans would just start using more gasoline and you've just exacerbated the whole problem. So now it's not really a great idea. It's been raised before. Biden says, oh, well, it's not just the federal government, it's to encourage the state governments to do the same thing because the state tax on gasoline is usually much higher. But then you're right back to the same problem. Well, if the states do it, then the states are going to have this, if it's effective, have this tax revenue shortfall that they use for roads and infrastructures, and how are they going to make up the difference? So it's, again, implicit cost without really clear what the benefits are going to be. And on top of it, it really doesn't go after the much bigger problem, which is inflation. Right? Because remember, inflation is not the increase in the price of a single good. No, inflation is a consistent, ongoing increases in the general level of prices. So even if a price of something is very important, like gasoline or diesel fuel increases, that's not really inflation. Yeah, it's a spark, leads to higher price of that good, but that's not inflation. No, remember what Milton Friedman taught us and showed empirically along with Anna Schwartz. That inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena. You get the spark, the higher price, but to really build the inflation fire, you need fuel for a fire. And the fuel is the money supply. And that's really what the problem is. The Federal Reserve has really dropped the ball when it comes to monetary policy, especially under the direction of Jay Powell. What they have done is they've continued to increase the money supply and increase the money supply and increase the money supply and took their eye off the inflation ball, if you will. Because what was happening is we were getting increases in the money supply, but we weren't getting inflation because we didn't have that spark. We didn't have those higher prices. Well, now what we've got are multiple sparks. We've got problems with fuel prices, which are coming from things like, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's also supply bottlenecks because a number of refineries were shut down because of the decrease in demand during COVID, and the oil companies really don't want to bring those refineries back because, one, it takes time, two, it's very costly, and three, there's this question of what exactly is the long-term demand for fossil fuels going to be in this country. And so why spend all this money bringing back these refineries if the demand then ultimately is not going to really fully recover? And then on top of it, you got these problems with labor markets. Can they actually get people to work in these oil refineries? So you got the gasoline price shock, you've got other supply chain price shocks, and of course you got labor market costs increasing. So you got all these shocks going on. Now that's coming together with the fuel that is the increase in the money supply thanks to the Federal Reserve, and you got inflation. So what's the solution? Well, the solution, as we know, you got to remove the fuel. You've got to decrease the growth rate of the money supply. Decreasing the growth rate of the money supply increases interest rates. But you can overdo it. Increasing those interest rates can also then topple the economy into a recession. So can Jay Powell and the Fed pull the rabbit out of the hat? Can they reduce the growth rate of the money supply, increase the interest rates without pushing the economy into a recession? I don't know. I mean, they don't have a great track record in terms of their conduct of monetary policy up to this point. And you look at consumer confidence very low. So I think a lot of Americans are doubtful that they're going to be able to pull this off, even though they really don't understand what monetary policy is. But we have to put blame where it needs to be placed. And that is at the feet of the Federal Reserve, and especially Jay Powell. So, what's going to happen? I don't know, right? Remember, the economists, especially yours truly, is horrible at predicting the future. All I can give you is the things to keep an eye on, right? Keep an eye on what happens to that growth rate of the money supply, what happens to consumer confidence, can they bring those prices, inflation rates down without tanking the overall economy? We shall see. Only time will tell. I wish I had better news. Maybe next time. But hopefully you found this information on this macro update useful. If so, subscribe to the blog. Free, no charge. I mean, there's an implicit cost. You got to spend time listening to these things. And also check out the rest of the webpage, brandltheeconomist.com, and see if there is useful information there for you. All right, check back again. Well, until next time, take care, everybody.